A Soviet submarine nicknamed Hiroshima rushed into service with secret flaws. The boat was pushed to sea before it was truly ready, and the crew already whispered about disaster as they prepared to sail. On July 4th, 1961, those fears materialized. The K-19's life or death countdown began, with 139 men realizing there would be no rescue and no adequate backup system coming. How did they know their fate, and why did the system that built the boat leave them no way out? The answer starts decades before disaster struck. By the late 1950s, the Soviet Union faced a new kind of threat beneath the waves. The United States had fielded Polaris submarines, boats that could launch nuclear missiles from hidden depths, far from any warning. In Moscow, this was seen as a direct challenge to Soviet security. Orders went out to match the American advantage and to do it fast. Project 658 was born, a crash program to deliver the nation's first nuclear-armed ballistic missile submarine. K-19 was the lead boat. Her keel was laid in October 1958 at the Submarine shipyard, and she was launched just 18 months later in April 1959. The pace was relentless. By November 12, 1960, K-19 was officially commissioned into the Soviet Navy, even though much of her final fitting and testing was still underway. The schedule had been set, and the work was forced to keep up with the rush. The drive to get K-19 to sea was not only about pride. Soviet land-based missiles were limited in range and accuracy. Submarines carrying nuclear R-13 missiles, each able to strike targets up to 650 kilometers away, offered a way to close the gap. A working submarine force was a vital deterrent, and that urgency shaped every decision at the shipyard and in the fleet. That urgency also produced compromises. Shipyard workers raced deadlines, sometimes at the expense of quality. Inspectors flagged welding flaws, electrical fires, equipment failures, and an overall sense that the boat was unfinished. An accident in the ballast tanks killed several workers before the boat even reached full trials. The crew assigned to K-19 quickly sensed the risks they were inheriting. In whispered conversations, a nickname surfaced: Hiroshima. It was a sign of the unease that ran through the ranks, a quiet warning that something fundamental may have been overlooked in the rush to build a weapon for a new era. Inside K-19's hull, the machinery that powered the submarine's nuclear heart came with a silent flaw. During construction, a pressure test meant to prove the strength of the reactor's primary cooling system went wrong. A missing gauge allowed pressure to climb to 400 atmospheres, double what the piping was designed to withstand. The officer in charge failed to report the overstress, and the pipes, now weakened, stayed in place. Shipyard defect logs from Sevmash listed welding cracks and unfinished joints, but deadlines took priority. The result was a reactor loop with invisible damage, hidden behind insulation and paint. A pressurized water reactor like K-19's depended on constant circulation of coolant to carry heat away from the core. If that flow stopped, temperatures would soar, threatening a meltdown. Western navies built in backup cooling circuits for emergencies, but on K-19, the backup system was left out, cut from the final build to save time. The only secondary circuit on board was never intended to handle a full loss of coolant. If a leak developed, there was no engineered way to restore cooling under pressure. Crew members understood the risk. The boat's reputation spread through quiet conversations below decks. They called her Hiroshima, a name that captured their private fear. If the reactor failed, there would be no second chance. The ticking clock was built into the steel itself. Every patrol sailed with the knowledge that a single crack, hidden since the pressure test, could one day decide their fate. In June 1961, K-19 moved silently through the North Atlantic, its steel hull carrying 139 men and 3 R-13 nuclear missiles. The patrol route hugged the icy edge of Greenland, threading between NATO surveillance and the ever-present risk of being discovered. Captain Nikolai Zatiev, seasoned but wary, led his crew through routines that left no room for mistakes. Every man aboard understood the weight of their orders to demonstrate Soviet power far from home with a submarine that had never seen real combat. Below decks, engineers monitored the twin reactors. Missile technicians checked warheads, and sonar operators listened for the faintest sign of enemy ships. The missiles, each with a reach of 650 kilometers, sat ready in their tubes, a silent warning to anyone watching from across the ocean. The air was thick with the hum of machinery and the unspoken knowledge that any failure, no matter how small, could be catastrophic. There was no backup boat trailing behind, no quick rescue if disaster struck. The responsibility for the nuclear arsenal and for every life aboard rested on the crew alone. Each shift passed in a mix of routine and tension as the men waited for the patrol to end and hoped the submarine would survive the cold, relentless Atlantic. Alarms erupted in the control room just after 4 in the morning. Gauges for the starboard reactor's cooling system swung hard to zero, primary pressure gone in an instant. The engineering watch scrambled to confirm what the instruments were telling them. In the reactor compartment, the sound changed. Pumps whined without resistance, and steam hissed through the bulkheads, thick and acrid. The temperature in the compartment shot past 140 degrees Celsius, pushing beyond what the dials could measure. Condensation dripped from pipes and pooled on the deck, carrying invisible danger with every drop. The crew knew what a sudden pressure collapse meant. Without forced circulation, heat from the reactor core had nowhere to go. Water in the primary loop started to boil, filling the compartment with radioactive steam. The emergency shutdown system had already dropped the control rods, but decay heat kept driving the temperature higher. In minutes, the air in nearby passages grew heavy and hot, the metallic tang of radiation mixing with sweat. Engineers ran calculations in their heads, how long before the core reached the point of no return. With no backup cooling system, the answer was measured in hours, not days. The realization spread among the watchstanders. The only thing standing between the crew and a nuclear catastrophe was the ability to improvise and the willingness to risk everything. The countdown had started, and every passing minute narrowed their options. Captain Zatiev gathered his engineering officers in the cramped control room. The only way to stop the reactor from melting down was to build a new cooling loop right there in the belly of the submarine. He asked for volunteers. The men who stepped forward understood exactly what they were facing. Every entry into the reactor compartment meant walking through a cloud of radioactive steam, with the air thick and scalding, and the walls slick with condensation that carried invisible death. They wore only raincoats and respirators, no real protection against the gamma radiation soaring from the exposed core. The repair teams worked in short, brutal shifts, 5 to 10 minutes at a time, never longer. Anything more would guarantee death even sooner. They cut and welded pipes from the drinking water system, using what little they had to improvise a new coolant circuit. The radiation in the compartment was so intense, by later estimates, hundreds to thousands of Roentgens per hour, that even a handful of minutes meant a fatal dose. Survivors would later recall the taste of metal in their mouths, the skin on their faces burning, and the sense that time itself was running out. By the time the makeshift loop began to circulate water through the reactor, several of the volunteers were already showing the first signs of radiation sickness. They had bought the submarine a few precious hours, but at a terrible price. 7 hours after the first alarms, relief finally appeared on the horizon. The diesel submarine S-270 answered K-19's distress call, drawing alongside in the cold Atlantic swell. By then, the true cost of the repair efforts was already clear. 8 men had received fatal doses of radiation during the desperate work to keep the reactor from melting down. Their symptoms had set in rapidly: vomiting, blistered skin, confusion. Some were too weak to move by the time help arrived. Transfer to S-270 was dangerous in its own right. The sea was rough, and many of the crew were already gravely ill. Men were moved across lines and rafts, bundled in what clothing could be found, but the urgency left little room for ceremony. Once aboard the rescue submarine, the most severely affected were isolated as best as possible, but no one could escape the knowledge of what had happened. Orders from above soon followed. Every survivor was instructed to remain silent about the accident. Official secrecy covered not just the technical details, but the very cause of their shipmates' deaths. Families received only vague explanations: training accidents or sudden illness, nothing more. Grief was forced underground, replaced by a discipline that demanded silence even as the tally of the dead began to rise. The crew's sacrifice was buried in classified files, their story hidden from the world for decades, and decades later, nuclear navies still operate behind classified walls. As new technologies race ahead, the lesson of K-19 endures. Secrecy can bury truth, but never the cost. Every system built in silence risks repeating old mistakes, this time with stakes that reach far beyond any single crew. Thanks for watching.